My name's Cassandra Hemenway. I'm the outreach manager at the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District, and I'll be co-presenting with Dora, our Eco AmeriCorps member, who you can see on the screen with me. So Dora and I are going to talk to you about all aspects of blue bin recycling and some other, the blue bin to beyond part is some of the additional recycling that's possible in Vermont and around the region as well. Couple housekeeping things. This webinar is brought to you by the Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District, but it's also because we have funding from the USDA Rural Utilities Service that we're able to offer so many webinars this season. So we're thankful to our funders and wanted to give them a nod. A couple other housekeeping things. You probably all are familiar with Zoom at this point. You have both a Q&A box and a chat box on your screen down below. And so we are inviting you to put any questions you have whatsoever in the Q&A box. And Dora will be monitoring that while we're presenting, and there will be a couple points through the presentation when we'll stop and answer a few of your questions. And then when we get to the end, we will have a longer Q&A session. So we invite you to stick around for that if we don't get to your question earlier. Sometimes people ask questions about things that are coming up next in the presentation. So if we don't answer your question, that might be why as well. The chat box is really useful if there's something you happen to know or a comment you want to make that wasn't mentioned in the presentation. That's a great place to share information. Everybody can see it. So it's really useful for that. And we also have muted everybody just to make it easier to present. Sometimes we get like 200 people on these webinars. That's not the case today, but just so you're aware. So Dora, do you want to say a quick hello and then we'll get started? Oh, we're having an audio issue, Dora.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So as Cass said, I'm the Eco AmeriCorps serving at the district this year here in Montpelier, and I'll be looking at the Q&A box throughout the webinar. So if you have questions, drop them in, and I'm excited to talk about recycling.
Great. Also, just one last thing before we actually get into the presentation, which is just to be aware that Dora and I and most of our staff at the Solid Waste District are working from home. Not all of us, we have a few folks back at our facility and at our office, but most of us are still working from home. And so we're each presenting separately from our homes. We've been doing this for a while now, so we're getting better at it, but we do occasionally have glitches, and we ask you to just forgive us if that happens. We will move on as quickly as we can if we do have some kind of a technical issue. And sometimes our internet is spotty because we're working from home and we live in Vermont. So if one of our internet goes off for some reason, the other one will still be there to keep going with the presentation. So now that we all know we're all human beings and we're all still making our way through this COVID-19 world, we're going to get started. So first of all, I'm going to I'll give you a quick overview, and then I'm going to try to do a poll. I'm still new at Zoom polls, but so this is what we're going to be covering today. We'll be reviewing, we'll start by just going a brief overview of the Universal Recycling Law, which is the piece of legislation in Vermont that actually enacted mandated recycling in the state and what that means. And then we'll talk about exactly what recycling means in the law. When we talk about recycling, we're going to loosely call that blue bin recycling, but when we call it blue bin, we're referring to the materials that are considered recycling by the state of Vermont when they say that those items are banned from the landfill. Contamination is anything that isn't supposed to go in your blue bin. So maybe we're going to go ways. But before we do, I'm going to see if I can do this poll. Just quickly answer yes or no. Do you already recycle? No judgments. We know that not everybody does, but let's see if, looks like most people here do. It's okay if you don't. Maybe you'll learn how on this. But yeah, we got a couple people who don't, or one person, but that's great. Couple people, yeah. So I'm glad you're here. Okay, so a lot of people are already recycling, but not everybody does. That's fine. I think we have almost everybody. A couple more people are doing it. That's great. I just wanted to kind of gauge, and it's fine if you're not already. I hope by the end of this webinar, you'll have a sense of how to get started. I'm going to close out of this now, but that is kind of reflective of, and you can see, I think, can everybody see this? Oh, here, share results. See, I'm new at the polling thing. So it looked like 10, we got 12 people logged on right now. 10 folks do recycle, a couple don't. And that's great. That means that everybody here is going to learn more about recycling. Okay, so this is where, if you aren't recycling yet, this is a really helpful part. It's going to seem a little complicated, but basically, if you remember, it's all about the 6 categories. That makes it easier and simplifies it. And the 6 categories start with paper. Paper is one of those items that we actually, when the state does waste audits, they do audits of the whole state. Like I can't remember the official name of it, it's blanking out right now. But when the state does that, every 5 years, they actually look through, they hire a firm that looks through all of the trash and sort of select it throughout the state. Paper often comes up as one of the recyclable items that we see in the landfill over and over and over again. And it's real easy to recycle. It's usually clean, you don't have to wash it. It doesn't. Good for it. I tried it and I did and always you can more of a rinse job. So let's see, I have another poll. Here we go. I was playing around with polls before the webinar started. So I'm going to launch this poll. And the question I want to know is, do you already wash your recyclables before you put them in the bin? And there's a number of ways or things people mean when we talk about washing. So just go ahead and answer. And the way you do it might not be on here. So just answer it the best of you can. So far we've got 2 categories. People either rinse them or wash them, kind of like with, I'm guessing with a sponge and a little soap, the way you would dishes. So we've got almost everybody has answered, and I'm going to give it another 30 seconds. And while you all are answering this poll, I will say that the sticky things that come up are things like if you have, I don't know, like a empty peanut butter jar is a good example, or like one of these, a tuna can. Those things that really do need to be washed with soap and water, those do need to be washed out, but almost everything else can be rinsed. Okay, we didn't get everybody's answer, but I'm really glad at least one person answered, why would I wash my recyclables? And that's a really good question. I'm going to end the polling and share it with you. So the reason why you would wash your recyclables is there's actually a number of reasons. One is because if you don't wash them, then you basically have some residual food and it could attract pests, it could smell. So just in your own home, it makes things a little bit more pleasant. But when it gets collected, it goes into a big truck mixed with other recyclables, and then it gets driven to the materials recovery facility. In our area, that would go to Chittenden County, and there it gets mixed in with even more. And so it's important that it isn't attracting pests. And then go further down the line, they actually go on a conveyor belt, and before they go through all the machinery at the MRF, where there's like magnets and blowers and all these cool like factory things that separate them automatically, but there's also people on the line. And so we don't really want people to have to handle things that are unsanitary. And finally, the food residuals can be contamination in the recycling process. So there's a number of reasons. You don't have to wash your recyclables. Even like, it looks like some folks wash them. Oh, let me see if I can share. I did share the results. Some folks wash recyclables the same way they wash dishes. Most, you can get away with just rinsing and drying. You don't even have to wash them. But rinse them out if they've had food in them, and wash them if it's sticky food like fish or peanut butter or tomato sauce or something like that. Okay, that was a lot of time spent on steel. I just wanted to talk about washing, and we'll go into that. It's not a big deal, but it is important to have things mostly rinsed off. Glass, this is a tricky item. Dora will talk about it in more depth, but for now, it's on our list of mandated recyclables, and that means all colors of glass, lids off. Typically, again, it's food glass. In the image here, you see wine and beer bottles. You might have like a jam jar. Olive oil comes in bottles. All of those kinds of things get rinsed out and put in the bin. And then the exceptions are like light bulbs. Broken glass doesn't go in the bin. If you have a broken glass, you put that in a paper bag or a cardboard box, and then it goes in your trash. Window glass doesn't go in, ceramics, that kind of thing, just jars. In a recycling
So a common question that we hear, and that you might even be wondering too, is are my things really getting recycled? And the short answer is, in Vermont, yes, but the reality is it's a lot more complicated than that. You might have seen in the news about international markets rejecting recyclables from the US, for example, or no longer accepting recyclables from the United States. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why that's happening and what we can do about it. Next slide, please. Factors determining a wide market. So and this thing and basically and it's not taking up the and that's the factor in the recycling. Recycling is this so factors like demand so after turning how or materials. So the oil production and to say carbon to do that. So to a way to test never and they are probably factors some of that is and you get all three of and it's so huge so we see this photo here and all is and a quick definition. So pain is not only for anything was other facility known as a so I have seen of other facility I mean so they're all considered as space and goes on as been for fleet for while shape of the first way. This is simple concept so I use that so it's like for your goal or anything like I'm not doing anything like that. I'm really concerned confirm that people see us when you just go on definitely not plastic glass on also and have people are really paper and make sure you take plastic in the video so it's for us to in house so it's with it and I'm just going to on here those with is hidden on software beyond the sample that actually plastic and other commentary and storing and So now we're going to see if there are any questions.
Hey, Dora, while you're checking out the questions, I wanted to mention that I did a little more research on that Tioga County fire, the one that you just said was the largest in modern history. And those lithium ion batteries are very dangerous. That fire burned for 3 days. And when I did a little bit more research about what happens when lithium ion batteries are thrown in the trash or the recycling, they actually had examples of fires that started in landfills from those that went on for a year. Like they just couldn't put it out. So that's a really great example of the kind of thing that we're going to talk about later, really soon, that has a place to go that's safer, but shouldn't go in the trash or recycling. Anyway, I just thought of that while you were presenting, and I was wondering, do we have a few questions?
Yeah, so we got a question here about what about plastic containers that used to contain things like shampoo and conditioners, and somebody also asked about medication. So basically items that are hard to wash out. Can those kind of containers also go in the blue bin?
Absolutely, yes. Shampoo and conditioner can be washed out. I mean, it's soap. You don't have to, get every drop of it out, but those definitely are recyclable. Medication containers are recyclable as well. Just rinse them out the same way you would. If they're prescription pill bottles, just make sure they're larger in diameter than 2 inches by 2 inches, and they can go on the bin with their lids on. Now, when we're talking about the hazardous materials, I'm really talking about materials that qualify as household hazardous waste. So that would be like pesticides, herbicides, automotive fluids, acids, but things that are like regular household things like shampoos, medicines, those are all recyclable with a quick rinse.
Thanks, Cass. So we got a couple questions about how to recycle soft plastics like plastic films, and we'll get into that pretty soon. And someone here is asking about glass recycling. So they reuse a lot of jars, but they're looking for ideas for places or organizations that might accept clean jars for reuse. I thought that was kind of interesting. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions, and if anyone listening has suggestions, feel free to put it in the chat too.
I'm not thinking of any, honestly, at the top of my head, especially with COVID. People are really a little bit nervous about accepting reuse, unfortunately, because it's not actually a problem, especially if you're washing things. I know that if you have certain jars, I've seen people post on Front Porch Forum about very specific kinds of jars, and usually there can be sort of an informal exchange that way. Like every now and then you see somebody who has, those dark brown colored jars that people use for tinctures, and usually there's a, kind of ongoing swapping around of those. And we used to have a colleague at the district who made candles, and she was really appreciative of small jars with lids because she would put her candles in the jars. I'm not sure I know of an outlet though. Do you, Dora?
I was also thinking Front Porch Forum because people always do arts and crafts with jars, or people might need them for storage, for example. So I think that's a great local outlet. Besides that, I don't really know of any organizations that specifically are looking for glass jar donations.
I'm seeing some, like the chat box is lighting up, and I can't look at it right now because I'm running the actual presentation. It messes up the presentation, but I'm hoping that maybe there are folks who are exchanging ideas through the chat box. I'm sure that there are those of you who are attending the webinar right now have a lot of ideas that Dora and I haven't thought of. So that might just share your ideas in the chat box. Maybe there's some, and we'll look at that later. You want to take one more question before we move on to the next section?
Sure. I just wanted to clarify, just because we're getting a number of questions about black plastics. So people are asking like if a certain material is a black plastic or not. Basically, if it's plastic and it's black colored, it's a black plastic. And unfortunately in Vermont, those have to go in the trash because they're considered contamination.
Yeah, and Dora will talk to this later. Dora has a really great section about PreCycling and, you know, reducing your use of things prior to even getting to the recycling bin. But for black plastics, that's one of the things where I actually sometimes, not always, make purchasing decisions based on if it's in a black plastic or not. Because I know that if I buy something that's in black plastic, then I have to throw that away afterward. So that's the only thing we have for you on black plastic. There isn't an option in Vermont for that. Let's move on to the next section. I know I see a lot more questions. We are going to keep doing this. We have a little bit more to go before we start talking about, oh, somehow we went backwards. I'm sorry. This happens to me whenever hold on. We have a little bit more to go, and then we're just going to do Q&A. And actually, this is the section where we will go in a little more depth about plastic bags, because that comes up every time. We're saying don't put them in your bin, and we have some ideas for where you can put them. That didn't come out right, but hopefully you know what I mean. So we're going to talk about how can you reduce more waste and some of the materials. We selected the materials that are the most toxic if you actually throw them away, but they can't go in your blue bin. But overall, the overarching concept is that almost everything, and I mean everything, so we're going you have
Yeah, so as important as it is to recycle what we can also reduce the need to even have to deal with recycling and contamination and all these other things in the first place by PreCycling. So some examples of PreCycling are reducing, reusing, and refusing. So even before we have to recycle, we can cut down on what we have and avoid the need to recycle. So some examples of reducing, if you go to the next slide, include planning ahead. For example, like meal planning. Yeah, there we go. So meal planning, because if you know what exactly you need, you won't have to buy excess, and you can make sure that you actually use what you have. Also, I wanted to highlight this really cool graphic I found. It's called the hierarchy of needs, and it's a really cool way of thinking about all the things you can do before you end up accumulating something else. So before you buy something, you can think about what you have already. You can borrow it, see if you can swap it with somebody on Front Porch Forum, for example. You can look into secondhand sources, thrift it, or make it. And I also wanted to add another option to that, which is repair. So if we talk about waste in general, we can rethink art. So starting with reducing, reusing, we can think about reusing excess, we can think about reducing, and repairing. And one example of repairing that I've really incorporated in my life is I would have to darn socks. So before I would throw away socks, and buy more socks, but I would have to darn out that. And some of you might
have. Looks like we lost Dora. I'm not sure. This is what I meant. Like sometimes the internet cuts out. Well, I will get to.
Am I back?
Oh, you're there. Okay. I might have got ahead of you. I went on to the refuse slide. Sorry. This is what happened.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry about that. It's my internet.
Yeah. I'm glad you got back so quickly.
Yeah. So refusing is another great way to avoid having to recycle in the end. So you can think about refusing single-use plastics, for example, things like straws and bags, single-use utensils when you get takeout, even things like paper napkins too. If you can use cloth napkins instead, you can say no to paper napkins, and you can end up reusing your own cloth napkin. Also, unnecessary packaging is another thing you can think about refusing. I got these photos from this Instagram account that literally just documents excess packaging. It's called Pointless Packaging. And as you can see, these are like individually wrapped eggplants and potatoes. And instead of choosing something that's wrapped in plastic, you can refuse that and choose something that's that doesn't carry this excess plastic that we don't need. And last but not least, next slide, please. We can think about reusing. So here are some examples of some really cool zero waste swaps. These are zero waste produce bags. This is a utensil kit, and on the bottom, that's a collapsible, reusable bag for your groceries or anything really. And I love these items because we use them quite frequently, and you can bring them around really easily, and you can even like DIY them at home. Like you don't have to go out and buy these products. You could sew your own little bag or put together your own little utensil kit, for example.
Oh, look at that. There's a great movement of retail stores that are just sustainable products. Oh, nice. Thanks for that link. Rebecca Davison shared that. Ethos, ethosantacruz.com. Yeah, there's some retailers that you can find online now that do a really lot of good things with sustainable sourcing and reuse and upcycling. Let's take some of these questions.
Yeah. Oh, and just a quick addition to the reuse. Somebody suggested that if you have flower or vegetable containers, those can be left at reuse centers, or Front Porch Forum is a great place to offer them too. So if you're in the middle of gardening projects right now, just a good note. Just looking at the questions right now. Somebody's asking, I'm not sure about this one, Cass. So somebody is asking, oh, just disappeared. Aseptic containers?
Oh yeah. So by that that's not a widely known term, but that is, and please update your question if I'm incorrect, but those are things like the boxes that like soy milk comes in, or almond milk, or sometimes there are soups that come in those. Those are called aseptic containers or Tetra Pak. And those sometimes get lumped in also with like gable-topped milk or juice cartons. And the answer to that is those are not recyclable in Vermont, but in other regions, they do have recycling programs for those. And those are a tricky one because they are composite materials. If you look at it, if you just rip like the top of one of the containers, you'll see that there's a layer of foil, there's plastic, there's some kind of a waxy box board, but somebody has figured out a way to recycle them. We just don't have that outlet in our state. And that goes back to what Dora had said earlier about black plastic, which is we just don't get the volume in Vermont to make it worth it for recyclers to spend money on trucks coming to and from Vermont. But my mother lives in Northampton, Mass. I grew up in that area a long time ago. And whenever I visit her, I bring my containers down and recycle them there. Maybe I shouldn't admit that publicly. Might be smuggling. But that tells me that it is a viable recycling stream, just not where we are.
Thanks, Cass. I have a question here about plastic films. Someone said that there are these clear co-op bags used for spices in bulk.
Oh yeah.
They have labels. Mm-hmm. And they're wondering, can those be dropped off with other plastics?
Yes.
And I just wanted to add in that Theron, one of our colleagues, has like a kind of a rule of thumb, like if the plastic is stretchy, it can be recycled with the plastic film drop off, but if it's crinkly, then it should go in the trash. And I find that to be a helpful way to think about it.
I'm seeing a question while we're talking about plastics, a question asked earlier about, the question is, should you put soft plastics like bread bags, etc., inside a plastic grocery bag that you want to recycle? I assume that means at the grocery store. Can that be tied as a group, or should you toss it in with other recyclables? So no plastic bags should ever be put in your bin with your other recyclables. And maybe that's not what that was meant by that question. But yes, you can take like a grocery bag and put all your plastics that you're going to recycle in there. That's how I do. I have a hook in my pantry and I hang a grocery bag in there. Usually it's one that already has a little hole in it or something. And then as I get recyclable plastics, I stuff them in that bag and then I tie it and I bring that. All those plastics can go together in one bag. That's fine.
That's what I do too.
There's
okay,
another... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'll go ahead and then I'll stop because you've been doing the questions. And this person, Andrea, asks, if glass is expensive to recycle, is it better to buy plastic? That's a great question. It's a hard one. My perspective is that I actually prefer to buy glass than plastic because glass is not toxic the way plastic is. Plastic releases endocrine disrupting chemicals that can really harm humans, even especially if they end up in the landfill and they get pulled into that leachate. There's so much toxicity in plastic that I prefer glass, but I hate it that the glass doesn't get recycled. But that's not the only factor when thinking about what to purchase. The other thing that I've heard on the other side of that argument, I've heard people say, well, it actually uses more fossil fuels when you use glass because it's heavier. So trucking it, ends up having a larger carbon footprint. I think you just have to weigh all of that for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what's better, what's not better. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dora?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. It's one that I think about too when I'm in the grocery store, for example. Also, sometimes you don't really have an option, like something only comes in a certain kind of packaging. The way I've been trying to avoid that altogether is to buy in bulk if I can, so I can bring my own container in the end and keep reusing it. But sometimes I do lean towards glass just because I know I can reuse it for storage, or I can give it to somebody else who might want to repurpose it.
It looks like Dora's internet cut out. She'll probably get back on. I'm going to go through a few other questions. So somebody says, we talked about that. Whitney asked about clear co-op bags. And then somebody identified as K asks, all frozen fruit bags, including stretchy ones, cannot be recycled. So the reason that I brought up frozen food bags, not necessarily fruit, but any frozen food, typically those bags are opaque. They're usually white and you can't see through them. They're thicker. And that's why they can't go in the plastic bag recycling. It's not about whether or not they're stretchy. That's more about their color. So that's the reason there. The stretchy thing that I talked about earlier and that Dora talked about, that's just a quick test. So there's two factors. It has to be opaque, clearer. You have to be able to hold it up to the light and see through it, and have a little flexibility when you stretch on it. Dora, is your internet back? It looks like you're here.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm gonna go ahead. You go. We've got a lot of questions here, so just keep working your way down.
Okay, we got a couple questions about shipping materials. Somebody was asking about packing peanuts, and we got another one about bubble wrap. So those are both not recyclable in the blue bin, but there are some shipping companies, for example, that might take them back, or people in your neighborhood might want them if they could reuse it, or you could hold on to it and reuse it yourself. Cass, do you have any other ideas about how to manage, say, styrofoam packing peanuts or bubble wrap?
The only option I know for styrofoam packing peanuts is reuse, and then don't use them. I know that people get packages with them and you're stuck with them. So one option is just like we keep saying, front porch forum, let people know you have some, or reuse them the next time you're sending a package. So that's one option. Other than that, they're styrofoam and they're trash. Every now and then there's someone I think Capital Copy in Montpelier was taking packing peanuts. You'd have to call them and ask, because I don't know now that COVID has happened. And the other thing was bubble wrap. Bubble wrap, if you don't have a reuse option, and again, if you have a lot of it, you could share on Front Porch Forum. There's a lot of people in our community that have little side businesses where they ship things and they're looking for that. So I believe eventually our bubble wrap, we actually were collecting some packaging materials at the ARC, and bubble mailers and bubble wrap were on the list. I check our website and keep an eye on that, cvswmd.org/ARCC. Right now, we're not taking that. But if you really don't want to deal with it or have it in your house, you can like squeeze it, pop all the bubbles, and put it in the plastic bag recycling.
Thanks, Cass. We have a question here about white cardboard packaging for frozen food. Can it be recycled? And I wasn't sure what that really meant, and I was wondering if you could speak to that, if you knew what that meant.
Yeah, so they just mean like boxes that sometimes it's like frozen meals come in white. The boxes are usually white. And a long time ago in Vermont, frozen food boxes were not supposed to go in recycling, but that has changed. So yeah, that's considered box board, just like a cereal box or a cracker box. Frozen food boxes can go in your recycle bin, in the blue bin.
Great. We just got a tip from someone about where to bring packing materials. They said Pack and Send Plus was taking packing materials, but you might have to double check about now. And they also said they've posted bubble wrap mailers for free on Craigslist and gotten a lot of responses for that. So that's a good place, good outlet for your bubble wrap mailers. Thanks for that tip.
I'm just going to follow up. Judith says frozen food boxes are usually waxed. I'm just going to tell you what we know from Chittenden Salt. We follow the direction of CVSWMD, that's Chittenden Solid Waste District, because they own the materials recovery facility where our materials go. And I don't think there's wax in those frozen food boxes, but they are slightly different and they are okay to recycle now. We've checked it out with Chittenden. So it's really fine to put your frozen food boxes in the blue bin recycling. And Kay says Pack and Plus is in Waterbury. Kim is asking, what about caps that don't screw on? What if you can't rinse, cut open? I'm not totally following what you mean, Kim. Caps that don't screw on, I'm assuming you're talking about plastic bottles. Yeah, if you have a cap that can't go back on the bottle, obviously that cap has to go in the trash and you can't do it. If there's a way that clicks on, or there's a different way for it to go on, can go back on, then it can go in the recycling. If I'm not understanding your question, just ask it again, because I wasn't totally sure what you meant by that.
Someone's asking about the mesh bags for citrus and onions, for example. And those those are not recyclable in Vermont. However, you can repurpose them. There are some really cool DIY tutorials online where people have turned those mesh bags into like produce bags. They've kind of sewn like a strip of cloth on each end and turned it into like a drawstring bag that they can use to hold more vegetables or fruit, which I thought was really cool. But beyond that, you'll have to throw them in the trash.
I'd like to address Betsy. Betsy asks, did you say glass isn't getting recycled at all? Is this temporary? So glass has been a problematic material for years. And some of it is getting recycled, but a lot of it isn't. If you really want to make sure your glass is getting recycled, you got to fight for a bottle bill in Vermont to expand it. Because one thing we know for sure is the bottles that are part of our bottle bill, somewhere between 80 and 90% of those actually get recycled. And if you look at how they're handled, they're separated. They go back to the source. They're handled appropriately. But when we have all of our different colors of glass all mixed together and crushed, they lose their value. If you see the piles of them at the materials recovery facility, it looks like a pile of sand. And it often has contamination in it, little tiny bits of plastic and lids and paper. So it is getting used. but it's not getting recycled back into another glass product like Dora said earlier. So they call it aggregate. So sometimes the glass aggregate is used in road fill when they're making the materials for resurfacing roads. It's been used for landfill cover, which is different than putting it in the landfill. There are rules for running the landfill which require what they call alternative daily cover. That means every day they have to cover the landfill with a certain material, and that there are all kinds of things that are used for that, but that keeps smells down and keeps the landfill a little bit more sanitary. And sometimes the glass aggregate is used for that. But yeah, glass recycling is really tricky, and a lot of it has to do with this push for single sort recycling that happened about 15 years ago. Or I don't know if you remember, Betsy, but a long time ago, all recycling was sorted in our area and around the country. That was normal. You had to sort your newspapers and your office paper and your different colors of glass and your plastics. Once we went to single sort, everything lost value, and glass in particular. There are a few places in our district and in Vermont that do still sort recyclables. In Barrytown, they're sorting, and down in some of the states that border New Hampshire, up in the Northeast Kingdom, and they're getting a higher value for the materials. They're marketing their own materials and getting a higher value. But yeah, I can't honestly tell you that if you recycle a glass bottle, it's going to get recycled. Do you see any others that you want to answer, Dora? I mean, we do have a few questions left, but some of them aren't about recycling, some are.
I just want to add to the glass recycling bit. Rebecca in the chat wrote that Strafford Farm recycles its glass milk bottles, and I believe that's I believe they take back their glass milk bottles and like refill it with milk and stuff. So that's one way you can be sure that glass that you bring back is being reused for that same purpose, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Our attendee named Kay has followed up on the single sort versus sorting soapbox I just got on, and asks, has the single sort versus all-in-one, which I believe probably means like sorting recyclables versus putting them all in one bin, been a net positive? And that's a good question. I think the debate that happens among those of us in this line of work is that single sort was brought into play to get more people to recycle, because a lot of people felt like it was a lot of work to sort recyclables. And once they could throw it all in one bin, they started recycling more. So maybe, but at the same time, it's not just glass that lost value. Paper loses value too, because remember, once your glass is in the bin, it does break from time to time. And when it's breaking, it's contaminating the paper. And so paper can only be downgraded. You can't recycle. The only way to recycle office paper into office paper is if you only have office paper in your bin, for example. If you have office paper in a bin with plastic and glass and steel, it's contaminated, even if you're a perfect recycler. And so it can only be recycled to a less valuable product, and so on. The same is true for and mixing recyclables means that they have to be sorted. That costs extra money. I mean, it's sort of a woulda, coulda, shoulda question about single sort versus dual or multiple sort recyclables, because all the systems in the country and across the world are now set up for single sort. And they are investments into continuing that system are in the millions of dollars for each facility. So it's here to stay, whether I like it or not. I should get off my soapbox. I kind of went down a rabbit hole. But there are still lingering places that are sorting, and if you can find one of those, you have a better shot at your materials actually getting recycled and getting recycled into an equal or higher value product.
So we got a question about recycling fabrics. And if you go on our website, and check out the A to Z guide, there's a list of places that might take your clean and dry and like clothes and textiles. And you could also, at home, you could repurpose fabrics into rags or reuse them for crafts, for example. Or again, I keep talking about Front Porch Forum, but it's a great resource. Like if you have fabrics, fabric pieces that, again, are clean and dry and reusable, like somebody else might want them and be able to take them.
I'm going to just interrupt here. We have a few more questions, but we're 15 minutes over our time. So I think we need to end the webinar now. Everyone will get a follow-up email with some resources in it and a copy of the recording. So you can share that with your friends or rewatch it to get some of the tips. And you'll also get some links to some other resources. And there's going to be a link to a very short survey, about as short as the first one you filled out. 3 questions, just kind of for us to get a sense of what you learned and how you think we did. So it might not happen instantly. It takes us a couple days sometimes to get that out, but we ask you if you would please open that up when you get it, and please do fill out the survey and hang on to that email because there's going to be a lot of resources in it. So thanks everybody, especially all of you who are still here and hung on this long. Really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.